you for joining me for the premiere edition of What Happened Yesterday here on America's New Clothes, where I endeavor to uncover things that perhaps you were unaware of that happened on the previous day. My name is Derek. Before getting to the episode today, please like, subscribe, and share our page on YouTube and Facebook. You can find us at America's New Clothes, and on Instagram and Twitter, we are at America's New C. I'll leave the description in the description box below the articles and things that I'm using for today's episode so that you can click on them and link to them yourself and research for yourself as well. But please leave comments below also if you have any feedback on this episode. Today I will cover the following things: the Pennsylvania Constitutional Election Challenge heads to SCOTUS, Michigan Senate Oversight Committee hears eyewitness testimony, Phil Klein from the Amistad Project presents a whistleblower who said he drove a USPS truck from Bethpage, New York to Pennsylvania to deliver completed ballots, and another eyewitness who saw backdating ballots in Wisconsin by his colleagues at the United States Postal Service. Trump files a Wisconsin lawsuit to challenge over 200,000 ballots, feeling that they were fraudulently cast. And Fauci, in a just-released Zoom call, says that the PCR tests cycled over 35 times have a reliability of a positive result that is minuscule, echoing what I have told you multiple times on my other podcast and supporting the New York Times article in September that said that over 90% of positive test results are false positives, according to their study. Further, Georgia GOP voters will likely boycott the January 5th runoff, and for good reason. A Vanderbilt kicker wins the Player of the Week special teams, and Gavin Newsom pushes forward with harsher statewide restrictions on churches despite the smackdown that Cuomo received last week by the Supreme Court of the United States. And lastly, A.G. Barr says his DOJ has found no evidence of widespread voter fraud. So jumping right into it. All right, we're going to start off with kind of really the reason why we're all here in this predicament with election fraud and everything else that's going on. And it's thanks to this gentleman who people put so much faith in. I call him a liar, the lying Dr. Fauci, who, if it wasn't for the patents that he partially owns and that the CDC and the NAIA doesn't have some type of ownership in, we wouldn't be in this predicament right now. And this is evident from going back to July, when Dr. Fauci, in a just released, I don't know if it was leaked or if we just all missed it, but in July, he was given a Zoom call with two individuals and had mentioned that these PCR tests that are being cycled 35, 40 times are highly unlikely to be proving that you are actually positive with an active COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 virus. So he talks about here, and this you can link to the article. I'll link it in the thing, but you can link to the New York Times article here. And then in the interview, he talks about, and it was called This Week in Virology. He joins the hosts. So he says, what is now sort of evolving into a bit of a standard is that you get a cycle threshold of 35 or more. The chances of it being replication competent are minuscule, meaning if you're having to cycle it that many times, you don't have the virus. So, and it's very frustrating for the patients as well as for the physicians, he continues, when somebody comes in and they repeat their PCR and it's like a 37 cycle threshold, but you almost never can culture virus from a 37 threshold cycle. This goes back into what the inventor of the PCR test said a couple years ago, 3 years ago or so. He's passed away now, where he said that once you cycle this thing probably 30 plus times, really, that you get to a point where there's just you don't have an active virus, and the PCR test, in his opinion, were not meant to be used for flu-like illnesses and coronaviruses. So we're in this predicament that we're in today because you had the Faucis of the world running around telling everybody to wear a mask, not wear a mask. They're effective, they're not effective. We're going to see a spike in case. We may have to shut down schools, to where now he's saying that the data is showing, well, schools are actually okay to keep open, that kids don't really transmit the virus, which we all knew in April of this year. But again, he needed the fear porn to keep everybody locked down because the global cabal needs us, locked in our homes and wearing masks, so we're all submissive idiots. But in October, he was just talking about that we're going to see a spike in cases, and we may need to look at for Thanksgiving to not have Thanksgiving with family this year, and we may just have to say, look, Christmas is going to be not normal this year as well. And of course, what you're about to see now that everybody has gone home, and the Thanksgiving week, the hospitals and testing centers weren't reporting for the week because of the holiday. So you're about to see a huge spike in cases, and they're going to all say, well, it's because everybody went home for Thanksgiving, and they will leave out the fact that we saw the case count go down dramatically in the last week because nobody's reporting, so they backlogged them. So now you'll be getting big drops this week, probably starting, it may have even started yesterday and today, that'll show, and I'll go into it in a minute, in California as of Tuesday with their latest reporting, what Gavin Newsom and his state attorneys are using as the reason why they need to shut the state down again. But nevertheless, just keep in mind, Fauci is lying to you left and right, and he's being, bandied about on CNN and CBS Today and all these other Sunday shows as being the bastion of truth here on the virus and the expert, when in fact he's nothing of the sort, in my opinion. He just is out there to keep driving fear porn to make sure that we all stay in on the pasture. We don't get outside the fences. We do what we're told. We're good submissive slaves, and just do what big state tells us to do. So wear your mask, social distance, don't go to church, and don't go visit family for the holidays, we were told. So just be a good citizen, stay at home, and be lonely. Next up, we have Vanderbilt football player Sarah Fuller, named as the SEC Special Teams Co-Player of the Week. On Saturday, she became the first woman to play in a Power 5 college football game and went on to be named the SEC Special Teams Co-Player of the Week, as she had a unbelievable 30-yard kickoff. Just impressive. I mean, it wowed everybody. Only kick of the game, and she becomes the SEC Co-Player of the Week. One kick, start the half. The head coach of Vanderbilt, 48 hours later, gets fired. So a black head football coach plays a female player. She gets named Co-Player of the Week. He gets fired. Let that sink. Now, this Gavin Newsom, the dictator of the Golden State, being California, is doubling down on his effort to limit participation in the places of worship. Meanwhile, he allows sporting events and protests and entertainment productions to continue in earnest and unabated. His Attorney General says California is experiencing an unprecedented surge in COVID-19 cases, creating an even greater public health need for restrictions on prolonged communal gatherings in indoor places. Let me highlight that for you here. There you are right there. His scientific evidence, his attorneys claim, demonstrates why those activities pose a particular grave threat of virus transmission during the current pandemic. Meanwhile, this quote-unquote science they allude to has yielded, as of all data compiled by Worldometers through yesterday, a total new deaths based on total new cases ratio of 0.0067%, and now total statewide deaths as compared to total case count of 0.015%, which is the same for the nation as a whole. So these restrictions have caused some churches to list themselves as strip clubs, since there don't seem to be any restrictions on them thus far in the state of California. So not quite sure how God feels about that, but that's between them and the Lord. While Satan dithers in tyranny from his mansion in Sacramento and having his French Laundry cycled in a room of 12. Welcome to the hypocrite's world of fine dining and leisure activities, for me, but not for thee, written by Gavin Newsom. My liberal progressive friends in California sadly clap like baby seals at their dictator's new edicts, while claiming, ironically, that Trump is the dictator. Their Hypocrite's World book is due out, I think, in January in hardback, since they aren't smart enough to realize what an actual dictator looks like. But then again, progressivism has morphed into a mental illness, and my friends there clearly aren't immune from it, because the only vaccine for it is common sense, and sadly, that's what liberal progressives lack. So enjoy the sunset, Californians. The dark of night fast approaches. So now let's get into the heart of the matter and all this election fraud many of my friends say that does not exist. Let's get into it and look at the facts. So Sean Parnell and Mike Kelly on their Pennsylvania constitutional case makes it to SCOTUS for review. It challenges that the Constitution of Pennsylvania doesn't allow for mail-in ballots to be allowed, but that they did make an exception for absentee ballots in the past. A no-excuse absentee ballot challenges Act 77 of the General Assembly that passed the GOP-led legislature earlier this year due to the Cloward-Piven-style COVID-19 hoax. The Commonwealth Court agreed to the merits of the lawsuit and ruled that the state could not certify the results of the election. It was appealed to the state Supreme Court, and the 5-2 Democrat-controlled Pennsylvania Supreme Court overruled that lower court's ruling, but didn't rule on the merits of the case that challenges Act 77. Only the fact that they couldn't, or they were, that the state of Pennsylvania could not certify the results. They overruled that. So now will SCOTUS overrule a state Supreme Court and hear the case on its merits, or what they attest to, being Parnell and Kelly, is they argue that Article 7 of the Pennsylvania Constitution makes clear that there are two and only two constitutionally permissible methods of voting. One is offering your ballot in propria persona at the polling place on election day, and two, exceptions to the first method limited to those persons qualifying under the absentee voting provision, Article 7 and Section 14 of the Pennsylvania Constitution. So we'll see if the Supreme Court will take up this case or not. If they do, and rule in favor of the plaintiffs, then the entirety of Pennsylvania's mail-in ballots that were considered no excuse requests could be in jeopardy. And we know now that more mail-in ballots were received than were sent out, according to the testimony last Wednesday that was also on the Supreme Secretary of State's website prior to them scrubbing that information and updating it. So it'll be interesting to see how that case continues through and if it's taken up by the Supreme Court of the United States and ruled and how its case will also affect potentially the Trump campaign. The Michigan Senate Oversight Committee on Tuesday held a hearing in Lansing on election fraud and irregularities with eyewitness testimony that yielded amazing accounts of what these poll watchers, vote tabulators, and election officials witnessed on November 3rd and 4th. The best testimony came from several eyewitnesses, the first being Melissa Carone, I think is how you say her name. She was a Dominion-trained IT contractor, and she revealed that ballots were being tabulated in the Department of Elections, which is completely illegal, and that the tabulation machines were also there, obviously being illegal as well. She said that batches of ballots were being scanned in 8 to 10 times, and she also revealed, oddly, that the owner of Dominion was at the TCF Center that night. I guess to oversee the fraud. When you have so much writing on the outcome, you want to be involved to where the greatest Dominion fraud was to take place, so might as well be at the TCF Center. She also claimed that one Dominion worker disappeared to a quote-unquote warehouse that he called the Chicago warehouse, and for some reason, but wouldn't explain why, but he was gone for several hours and returned just prior to the big dumps for Biden coming in. Another person that was there is a guy named Patrick Kolbeck. He's an aerospace engineer, author, former elected official, former candidate for governor in the state of Michigan as well, served his 2 terms as Michigan state senator. But he was an eyewitness that testified along with another gentleman who testified a little bit later. They were together, and they testified on the day in question, serving as poll challengers, that they observed that the computers in the TCF Center were all connected to the internet. Here's his diagram where he shows how the system was set up. But what was interesting too is he had asked, I guess, a guy named David Natham to scroll over the land connection, but Nathan refused to do it. That would have shown, he says, whether the computers were connected to the internet, and he later examined the physical cabling connections and took a picture of it. And the IT technician on the stage actively discouraged any close-up observation of the network. Linda Lee Tarver is another eyewitness. She's an African American from Lansing and served as the ethnic vice chair of the Michigan Republican Party, African American Republican, and Hispanic Latino American Republican advisory councils. She's a member of the Republican Jewish Coalition of Michigan and the Christian Coalition as well. Her testimony centered on how the people of color vote in Detroit is disenfranchised every election, and when 71% of the absentee ballots don't reconcile in Detroit, that we have a major issue. She said that nearly every person of color precinct won't balance across the state, and that is scary. The senators did seem most interested in her testimony and had several follow-up questions for her, as she has served under the Secretary of State for 29 years, and she knows how elections are effectuated much better than any of the senators that were on the dais. In more illegal vote activity, we have in Nevada, the Nevada Native Vote Project used gift cards, electronics, and other gifts to bribe Native Americans to vote. Any monetary exchange for votes, whether partisan or not, is illegal. Here they show the ballots, being able to get them. They've since deleted the social media posts. A lawsuit has been filed on behalf of the Trump campaign in regards to this. And someone posted yesterday on his Twitter account that there's hours of video footage of Democrat operatives in Nevada offering gifts for Native American votes. They are videoed giving away gift cards, Biden merchandise, Biden cookies, laptops, iPads, and even televisions. So more shenanigans going on, but don't worry. AG Barr said there's no fraud going on. So late yesterday, the Trump campaign appealed a decision on allowing which was actually, that it says here, the heart of the lawsuit that Trump had filed, which they used the recount in Dane and Madison, or in Milwaukee County, to gather evidence on. The press tells you that, oh, Trump lost another 122 or 184 votes, whatever it was, that Biden picked up in the recount. So why is he going to continue to push this when the vote count continues to go Biden's way? Well, what they did was they used the recount to gather the evidence on just how the fraud was committed. They've gathered that now. They challenged over 238,000 ballots that were one of the two, it says here, one of the two main targets was the absentee ballots cast in person at early voting locations, where Wisconsin voters cast more than 1.9 million ballots before Election Day, either by mail, left in drop boxes, or at in-person early voting locations. That total alone is equivalent to 63% of all ballots cast in 2016. State law requires those who vote absentee to apply for absentee ballots in writing, and Trump's campaign alleges that early in-person voters did not follow this rule, which again is how they use that recount to decipher which people and which ballots were not cast or requested in this manner. Trump's team contends that those votes cast early in person in Milwaukee and Dane should be disqualified since the ballots did not include a separate application request. Again, the two counties targeted are both left-leaning and had sizable portions of their total vote cast early in person. In Milwaukee County, 23.7% of the votes were cast early, and in Dane County, 17.7% of the votes were cast early in person. And both of those counties went for Biden. And one of the main things here is this: voters who didn't submit a voter ID because they identified as indefinitely confined. This number jumped to more than 200,000 people this year. Again, this was another place where they were able to determine and see where these individuals are not indefinitely confined. They use social media, Twitter posts, social media posts, everything else to show that these people may have been out playing basketball, football, gone to games, gone to their kids' sporting events, whatever it may be, while claiming to supposedly be indefinitely confined, which is against the law. So they're using the people, they took their names, so they're doing a great job of figuring out where all the fraud is occurring in the state of Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, and obviously Michigan as well coming up. So what they also determined was that in Wisconsin, the people who didn't provide an address, that the clerks were allowed to fill the addresses in if they could find the information by talking to the voter. This is considered as ballot curing. And Trump is arguing that only a voter or witness can fill out the address on the ballots, and that those ballots a clerk that has cured should therefore be disqualified. In 2020, an election that also had a higher than usual volume of absentee voting because of the pandemic, more than 14,000 ballots were rejected because of missing addresses, or just over 1%. However, this time the rate, I think, was below like 0.3% or something in the state of Wisconsin. And others in Wisconsin had what was called the Democracy in the Park initiative, which went out to local parks to do absentee ballot to find and register voters and accept absentee ballots. Senate Majority Leader Scott Fitzgerald and the Assembly Speaker both Republicans sent a cease and desist order to the city clerk on that, calling the event illegal. The event was allowed to continue anyway, and so the Trump campaign unfortunately tried unsuccessfully to throw out those ballots during the recount, alleging that the event amounted to early voting before the state's 2-week early voting period began. We will see how this one shapes up. But I believe that they're actually going to be successful. Series of these, I think he's down by 20,000 votes in Wisconsin. And from what Matt Brainerd has shown, what these guys here are showing in challenging all of these ballots, is that they're going to be able to easily find more than 20,000 ballots. They're claiming up to 238,000? Yeah, just over 238,000 ballots. But from people that are familiar with the case and the recount, they're saying that they should be able to find easily over 20,000 and in a full recount, or if they just challenge the ones that have been so far come up on the ballot challenges. So let's. The next topic is the Georgia Senate runoff races that will be occurring for both Senate seats in Georgia between David Perdue and Jon Ossoff and Kelly Loeffler and Warnock. The interesting part about this is the Get Out the Vote campaign that the Democrats are doing is frankly just kicking butt against the GOP. The GOP is having problems, and I concur with the opposition to the GOP in this instance is that the Secretary of State here and the governor are not doing anything in their power to help in the recount that occurred. They have they they agreed to the consent decree by Stacey Abrams, which, according to the Constitution of Georgia and the law, was illegal. But Raffensperger did that and agreed to it. So that's what Lynn Wood's case is involving. But the GOP, especially in the rural areas, they're not going to turn out the vote for this election. So I would fully expect, unless something changes in a major way, I would fully expect that the GOP will lose probably Kelly Loeffler's seat. Perdue will win on name recognition and the fact that he actually gets stuff done for the state. And Ossoff is a far left liberal, Hollywood liberal, who's in bed with China as well. I'm in agreement with understanding why GOP won't turn out to vote. The Secretary of State and Brian Kemp, the governor, Brian Kemp won in 2018 by cheating. And he had a machine wiped in Kennesaw when he was Secretary of State there before he took office that had a lot of voting irregularities, but that tipped that precinct to give him the victory. Suppose that was a Dominion machine or was run by Smartmatic software, but one of the two. Given that, he's and now one of his former chief of staff is a lobbyist for Dominion Software. So a $109 million contract went to Dominion. A judge ruled last week that, or this week, I think it was on Sunday night, to seize the machines in Gwinnett, I think Cobb and DeKalb County, maybe, or Cherokee County, and not allow those machines to be wiped. Raffensperger and the Secretary or the state of Georgia, they appealed the ruling. He overturned his ruling because the county officials weren't part of it. So Lynn Wood made them a part of it, and now he's since upheld his ruling. So those machines are being, I think, confiscated or not being allowed to be updated with software. Meanwhile, in Fulton County on Monday, there was a software glitch that required an upgrade, and so the Dominion people were allowed to come in and play around with the server there on those voting machines. So Kemp is responsible for this cluster, as is Raffensperger. They know they're going to be exposed if they allow the full recount and audit to go on. So they're doing all they can to eliminate the evidence. So wiping evidence is going to hopefully for them save their butt, but it won't save the state of Georgia. I think that you're going to see many Republicans stay home and not vote this election and just say, hey, you're not going to fight for me. Why am I going to fight for you? And so Ronna McDaniel came here. She's the head of the RNC, but she basically got laughed off the stage the other day. She was saying that the count's not over and the state hasn't been decided yet or whatever. but she's not doing anything, and she's not pressuring these guys to stand up and fight for what, again, Matt Brainerd, a guy named Derek Stillwater, I believe his name is. He's a former FBI special agent who's in cybersecurity. He's even shown that there's 13 or 17,000 ballots that were cast by people living out of state that also voted out of state. So those would become null and void. I think he's lost Georgia by what, 12,000 or 13,000 votes. So just that one thing alone there would overturn the election. But you have Raffensperger and Brian Kemp staying quiet. But you're having them say that there's no evidence that would overturn the election and this, that, and the other, which is just wrong. So the Georgia GOP voter is going to just basically give them the middle finger and say, then fine, we're not going to fight for you. And if the country goes down, then unfortunately it's got to go down. And understand my friends and colleagues from around the country who are saying, hey, you guys have to get out there and vote. I'm just going to tell them now it's probably not going to happen. If we keep allowing this cancer to keep growing, it's just going to keep growing, and evil will be allowed to live and fester and grow. And there's only one way to eliminate a cancer. So you got to eradicate it at its source. And hopefully the Kemps and the Raffensperger and all those involved here in Georgia with these elections that allowed this fraud to happen, and it's fraud. Anybody that looks at it with an objective mind, and until you take those people to jail and hold them accountable, nothing's going to change. And so the Georgia voter says, if nothing's going to change, you're not changing the rules of the game, even though you know that the last election was just fraudulent, and there's mounting evidence to prove that. You're going to allow the same thing to happen again? No thanks. Basically, my vote doesn't mean anything. So to that GOP, you're going to have to lay in the bed that you made, and that bed has fleas. So enjoy the ride. Go Dogs. And here we have Attorney General Barr comes out of hibernation before winter sets in to say that the DOJ has uncovered no evidence of voter fraud that would change the outcome of the 2020 election. Now, this, of course, flies in the face of all of the mounting evidence, people with sworn testimonies made by former FBI officials, made by our special agents, made by former military intel and cybersecurity individuals in sworn testimony that have given their testimony in person for all to see. But AG Barr, I guess, slept through all of that, even though the Melissa Barone or Carone that testified yesterday in Michigan, Matt Brainerd, who's testified in Arizona, and I think he's going to testify today or tomorrow in Nevada, I believe it is, on what he has been able to find. He's turned over all of his information to a special field agent in LA with the FBI, as well as to the DOJ and local law enforcement in each state and attorney generals in each state and the Senate and legislatures in each state. And Melissa Carone in Michigan yesterday said she's turned over all of her information, what she saw and witnessed, to DOJ and FBI as well. And they literally have heard nothing. So AG Barr is asleep at the wheel. Liberals are loving the fact that he came out and said this, right? The guy that they swore to hate and said that he was a Trump puppet is now they're dancing around him in total glee right now, in just ecstasy that he came out and said that he's uncovered no evidence of fraud that would overturn the election. So it's just the hypocrisy of it all is pretty amazing, especially again when you take into account that the mathematical impossibilities that occurred in widespread fashion. You have 5 states who coordinated to shut down the vote count at the exact same time, have eyewitness after eyewitness in sworn testimony, which again, if they risk perjury, right, which is prosecution that they would risk by saying so, and you have attorneys that are taking these clients and risking being disbarred over all of this evidence that they've gathered. And you see yesterday again with that Jesse Morgan guy saying that he delivered on October 21st 24 cases or 24 gaylords of completed ballots to Harrisburg, then was told to go to Lancaster, showed up at Lancaster the next morning to pick up his trailer, and it had disappeared. He's never seen it since, I don't believe. He didn't allude to the fact that he's got it back. So his trailer now is just gone. He said that's the trailer he's had for 16 months. And they had estimates on those in those Gaylord packages of up to 288,000 ballots just in Pennsylvania alone. and I think Biden won Pennsylvania by 80,000 votes on the fraudulent recount or fraudulent count that was tabulated. You have ballots show up in the middle of the night that multiple eyewitnesses attest to. You have a guy's truck that disappeared, even though the supervisor would not give him any bill of transport or bill of receipt that he had done his job. You've got mathematicians from all over the country that are showing the mathematical impossibilities of what occurred. Of again, Matt Brainerd and the special agent at the FBI showing that a vast number, to overturn 3 states, Matt Brainerd says Georgia, Wisconsin, and Arizona alone, that he and in what he's been able to put together, calling people who claimed that either sent in an absentee ballot that never requested one or sent in an absentee ballot that was never received, are enough to overturn those 3 states for Donald Trump. But A.G. Barr says he can't find anything. So you can send FBI agents, 13 of them, I think, or 12 of them, down to a NASCAR garage in Alabama, I believe it was, or maybe it was North Carolina, that had supposedly a noose hanging from it. You can send agents down there to check on that because that's racism. But when it comes to a coup against the President of the United States, nothing can be done on that. We looked at it, didn't find anything. Moving on. Let's move on now. You had Christopher Krebs, the head of cybersecurity and infrastructure at DHS, claimed that this was the most secure election the United States has ever had. He got fired. Esper's been fired at the head of the DOD. And you have all these things coming out and showing that something is amiss and something is rotten in Denmark, as we've heard many times over the last couple of weeks or last month, I guess. So tomorrow will be the anniversary of the election fraud that happened in the coup against the President of the United States. So anyway, that's it. We'll do a wrap on that and enjoy the rest of your evening. And hope you like the content, and I'll bring you more. We'll see you tomorrow.